guys, it's MJ Universal, and welcome to What If Deku Was the Ghost Rider? So, I got this suggestion from one of you in the comments on what if Deku had atom manipulation. I'll try and edit the comment on screen right now, but yeah. So, this story will start at Izuku's age of not 13, at Izuku's age of 12. On one day where Izuku is being bullied particularly worse than any of the other days, Bakugo finally tells him to go take a swan dive off the roof. While in the anime he doesn't say this until the beginning of their last year of middle school, and I'm having it earlier just so I can get the story on. And at this point in time, Izuku is unable to actually fight off his emotions, as right now he would have just gone into puberty and his hormones would be raging and make him not rational. So he actually takes Bakugo's advice and tries to kill himself. After he does this, he thinks he died and went to hell because of the fact that it's completely dark except for some flames. And Izuku's just like, in his mind, is thinking, what did I do to deserve this? As he's thinking that, the form of a human, or not human, but a humanoid shape made entirely of fire suddenly appears before him and reaches its hand out towards Izuku. Izuku ends up taking the hand and then wakes up from his comatose state. When he wakes up, he hears the sound of a heart monitor right next to him, and sounds of sobbing coming from the opposite side. Izuku then then puts his hand on his mother's head once he figures out where he is and what happened. But when he does, his hand isn't his own, or not entirely. As soon as he puts his hand on his mother's head, his hand becomes far thinner and begins to have a blue flame emit from it. This is due to Izuku's pure nature. And so, when he does this, Inko ends up pulling her head up to see that Izuku's awake, and ends up giving him a hug, or as best as she can, without injuring him more. She then goes on to say, "Izuku, why did you have to do that?" And Izuku responds with, "Sorry, Mom. I couldn't take it anymore." When he says this, tears begin to form in his eyes, and he ends up they both end up crying until Izuku falls asleep from the amount of energy that was expended from him having to heal his body. Later on, he wakes up in the middle of the night, suddenly feeling the urge to get out of the hospital bed and go and find out what this ominous feeling is from about three blocks down. When Deku ends up going there, he doesn't go there immediately. When he tries to get out, he notices that all of a sudden all of the casts that were on his body end up shattering. And he finds himself far stronger than what he was before. Izuku then, since his mother and the doctors aren't there, ends up grabbing the clothes that were in the drawer next to his bed, and he replaces his hospital gown for his normal clothes and runs out of the building, seeing that and he goes towards the ominous feeling. When he gets there, he sees a group of thugs mugging this man, who ends up being pushed to the ground and lands what looked to be quite painfully. Izuku then shouts, "Stop!" And as he does, he transforms into his Ghost Rider form. Izuku's form has a mixture of blue and red flames due to the fact that the influence of the Ghost Rider spirit is still all about vengeance, whereas Izuku's pure heart and soul are currently taking the reins and keeping him from doing anything too drastic. When the man pulls a gun out and tries to shoot Izuku, it ends up hitting him right where his forehead was, but because of the fire, it just melts as it hits his head. And not that the bullet would have done much damage anyway. So Izuku then runs towards him and surprisingly manages to cross the distance of about 10 yards in the span of 2 seconds. And Izuku just chalks it up to adrenaline, because he still doesn't realize that he's on fire. Well, on fire. And he ends up knocking out the thugs and goes to help the man who was knocked to the ground. When he does, the man looks up and says, "Thank you, young sir. Might I ask are you a pro hero?" Izuku, not really knowing how to respond to this, says, "No, just someone No, just someone who thought it was just someone who was doing the right thing. And the man seems to accept this. When he gets up, Izuku goes to the grab the wallet that the thugs took, and it was at that moment that he realized that his hand was completely made of bone and covered in a pale blue flame with orange and red flickering within it. The man ends up taking the wallet from Izuku, and Izuku once again thanks him for coming to his aid. Little to those two's awareness, a pro hero was hiding in the shadows and saw what Izuku did. Izuku then, once the ominous feeling went away, turned back into his normal self and started walking towards the hospital again. Time skip about 3 months after that. Izuku keeps waking up in the middle of the night, finding himself unable to sleep due to similar ominous feelings. Yet once he exits the door of his home, he ends up finding that time passes so quickly that when he's aware of it, the ominous feeling is gone and he's back in his room. This would happen for 3 months before he would go to his mom and ask her to take him to the doctor to see what's going on with him. When the doctor hears what's going on, he suggests that perhaps it might be the awakening of a quirk that they had somehow managed to miss. They do all the tests, and then when they seem to think that Izuku is still quirkless and just has insomnia, all of a sudden the ominous feeling returns to Izuku, and he suddenly bursts into flames, this time with a much more crimson look. Like, there's more crimson and orange rather than blue flames. And when he transforms this time, when he does, he ends up jumping out the window and lands on his feet and runs towards where the ominous feeling is coming from. Once again, time skip about 30 minutes where Izuku wakes up with a mild headache and in an alleyway for some reason. He just wakes up there without knowing how he got there. Last thing he remembered was he was in the doctor's office, and they were about to tell him that it was just insomnia. When he walks out of the alley, he sees police as well as a few pro heroes on scene, ready to attack put down someone or something. When he comes out of the alley, the police immediately are on guard, and so are the pro heroes. Izuku immediately puts his hands up, thinking, "What's going on? Why am I being why am I being treated like this? And the ominous feeling comes back, but not to the same degree as what it was in the doctor's office or in the middle of the night. Izuku is then put in Quark restraining handcuffs and brought to the police station for questioning. They ask him some pretty basic questions, and they all come out to be true. So they have no reason to suspect that Izuku. They have no reason to suspect that Izuku's the one who caused the mayhem a few streets down from where they found him in the alley. But then again, he doesn't know what mayhem they're talking about when they say this. Izuku then tells them how there was a gap in his memory. He was one place 1 second, and in the next, he was waking up in the alley. So they decide to go ask the doctor what happened, and along the way find that his mother was still worried and waiting for her son to be found and brought back to the hospital. When they come and ask the doctor questions, not Izuku, the detective asks the same questions and gets the response that suddenly, after doing a bunch of tests that had diagnosed him quirkless, he had suddenly transformed into a skeleton with mainly red flames, but in some places spots of blue could be seen. So they decided to put Izuku into quirk counseling and end up just chalking it up to the activation of his quirk, and don't really care much about what's going on, and then they leave it at that. He goes to the quirk counseling meetings and ends up finding a way to control the power, although not to the same degree as Johnny Blaze did in both the comics and the movies, if you remember those. Izuku then Izuku's abilities are basically called Hellflame Transformation, is what they called his quirk, due to the fact that whenever he would use his flames, it would end up incinerating almost everything. So, he's time skip to the first scene of the anime. The teacher walks in and is like, "Hello, class. We're going to be doing career aptitude tests to see where you're going after high school or after middle school." And then he throws the papers up in the air and says, "But why bother? I know you all want to get into the hero course." When he says this, all the kids except for 3 end up using their quirks. The first one of notice is the same blonde that tormented Izuku to the breaking point. He seemed quiet and composed, yet also cocky. When The second person was a girl with olive black hair and ended up and ended up uh, and just had her composure, just kept her composure and stayed perfectly still. The third was Izuku Midoriya. The he ended up he was he was much like the raven-haired girl, and was composed and almost at a tranquility, at least on the outside. On the inside, Izuku Midoriya was ecstatic and for couldn't wait for the chance to go to UA. When and as After the class was told to calm down and stop using their quirks, Bakugo does the same thing in the anime by jumping onto his desk and saying, "Hey, Teach, don't lump me in with these bunch of losers. They'll be lucky to become sidekicks to some busted D-lister." And everyone appears to get angry at Bakugo, and he says, "Ah, yes, you're going to UA, is that correct? Isn't that correct?" Everyone shuts up and starts gawking at the fact that he's trying for the national school. And then Bakugo says, "That's right. I'm the best, and therefore it's the only school that's right for me." In a cocky tone. Then the teacher says, "Ah, yes, Midoriya and Jiro. You two are also trying for UA, isn't that correct?" When the students hear this, they don't pay much mind to Midoriya since he awakened his quote unquote quirk. But when they hear Jiro, also known as the third Ravenet, or the third person who stayed silent, they begin to laugh and say that there's no way that she could get in to UA with a quirk like hers. When Izuku hears this, he simply whistles, and all of a sudden the class goes quiet. Izuku then stands up and says, "Look, while she may not have a quirk suited for combat, that does not mean she cannot be a hero. A hero is not someone who defeats villains, but rather someone who does the right thing." And when he says this, the class kind of shudder at the immense amount of ferocity in his voice. They weren't able to tell whether the ferocity was coming from disdain of what they were saying, or whether or not the ferocity came from a complete and utter devotion to his beliefs. They decided it would be best to be quiet and lay low. Even Bakugo, after hearing Izuku, began to calm down and sit back in his chair. The day went on like normal, up until they were getting ready to leave. When Jiro walks up to Izuku and says, "Thanks for what you said back there." At which point Izuku says, "It was no problem. Just I can't stand people who seem to think that the only reason heroes exist is for fame and defeating villains. Izuku then Izuku then uh, walks home, and Jiro walks in another direction. When suddenly an intense, ominous feeling swells up in the area around Izuku. But I'm gonna leave it off on a cliffhanger, so if you would, please like, subscribe, and comment on what you think will happen next. Just give. And also, I would like to give thanks to all of those who have uh, kept their subscriptions to my channel, even though I haven't made a video in months. I do thank you all for that. But other than that, have a wonderful day. Peace.